It is great to be back with the Roebuck congregation. We love the church here, always have, and it is so encouraging, I have to say, to receive support, not only financial support, but also prayers and just thoughts. And we heard from so many of you while we've been in Cusco, and of course we're returning, plan to be there 2 more years. And so I just want to say thank you. Let me start off by saying thank you for the generosity. Thank you for contacting us again, and that just meant so much to us to know that churches come back and support again. Someone told me in the Florence area Sunday, and I was explaining about our relationship with Roebuck here, and they said, churches don't do that. They don't contact the missionary again and ask if they can support again if there's a need. And of course there was a need, and so we were able to make that connection again. And so it's just exciting to be working with the Roebuck Church here. And again, as always, to see you all and to be with you all. I wish we could have brought the kids. We traveled yesterday. We traveled the day before that. We plan on traveling Sunday as well. And so they were worn out after yesterday, and it was obvious. Our twins are turning 3 this Saturday, and so you can imagine traveling with twins. Our youngest, Alba, she is almost 3 months old, and then our oldest is 7. So traveling like that, hopping around is quite a bit on them sometimes. But they're all doing great. We're very blessed. They're doing great in school. Cole, our oldest, is fluent in Spanish now. He goes to school there. And a lot of people ask, he knows English as well. Just so you know, I get that question a lot. Cole speaks English and Spanish, and so he's doing great, and the other kids, and Allison as well. I want to mention also my brother was good enough to come with me tonight, and that's just great for me. We are twin brothers, and so you can make jokes. I've heard some of them already. All great jokes, and you're welcome to make more jokes. Twin jokes, we've heard them all, but we laugh at them anyway. They're good jokes. But it's always good to see family when we're back on furlough back in the States as well. I brought some pictures, I brought some video, I have some goals that you all are very familiar with already because we, again, have been here several times discussing the work. I have good news from Cusco. Things are going really well. God's blessing the work there, blessing the church plant. Just so you know, we planted the church about 5.5 years ago. We've been there a little over 6.5 years now. And so it's still a new church plant. But we're already looking to withdraw the missionary presence from Cusco, and hopefully it will be a self-sustaining work in all 10 to 15 years. And so in the next 10 years or so, a little less than 10 years, we look to make it a self-sustaining work, no missionary presence. And so we've got a lot of work to do. But I wanted to start by showing you this picture. And so you can see I'm pictured there with my wife Allison and our one son at the time, Cole, our oldest. And Gary and Jennifer Reeves are there, and Matt and Charlotte Cook. Matt and Charlotte now live in Henderson. Saw them yesterday, and Gabby as well. I'm sure you all have prayed for Gabby, if you remember their story. They were once on our team, and they're pictured as well. And we're there with a missionary couple who helped us settle in. But this was almost 7 years ago at the airport in Cusco. This was when we were nervous. We didn't know what was going on. I knew how to say a few foods, colors in Spanish, and that was about it. And all of us were like that, and we didn't know what to expect. We had a strategy, we had a plan, we had some goals, same goals we have today. We didn't really know how this was going to go, as you can imagine. Imagine stepping into a city of 500,000 with the decision and commitment to plant a church, and you have no idea what's going to happen. This was us right here about 7 years ago. And 7 years ago, we would have staff meetings and team meetings, but it was walking in the dark, kind of. We had nothing to measure it by. We didn't know what to expect again. Now, we have meetings in Spanish and in English because we now have Peruvians sitting in on those staff and team meetings. And we now have information, and we now have something to build on. 7 years ago, or I should say 5.5 years ago, when we started the congregation of the Lord's Church there in Cusco, we didn't know what to expect. We would open the church doors, and I remember Matt and we would hold the programs or the bulletin that day in our hands to give out to whoever would come in, and we were literally praying that someone would walk through the door. We didn't know who would come to worship that day. It was nerve-wracking. It was scary, and we didn't know how many would come. It was 20 people sometimes. If it was a good day, it would be 30 people. And so 7 years ago, the church, the congregation there, consisted of 6 adults and a few kids. Now it's on average 120 in worship attendance and growing. I say all this to just, now that we're 5.5 years into the work, almost 6, you can see the contrast between what it was and what it is today. Where we were and where we are today. And this is the message for this evening, the presentation, this idea of replacing ourselves. And I like that term. I like that phrase. And I think missionaries should use that because we never should be long-term missionaries in one area, but rather we're constantly replacing ourselves and working ourselves out of a job. Thinking about that, I'd like to talk about that some, replacing ourselves and future leaders. There's a book, Transforming Discipleship, that was written by an author, Greg Ogden, and he said the following: "The effectiveness of one's ministry is to be measured by how well it flourishes after one's departure." Sometimes we get caught up in the results, the immediate results, or maybe a worship attendance or number of baptisms, but really, the effectiveness of any ministry, especially in mission work, is revealed after one's departure. You remember the writings of Paul, Scripture? Paul used that phrase several times. After my departure. That was a missionary talking about his work after his departure. And so this is true with us as well in Cusco. We're truly effective, and we could see the true results maybe 10, 20, 30 years after the last missionary leaves Cusco. That's what we're looking towards. We're not looking towards 2017, we're looking towards 2027 to see if this work truly is effective in Cusco. Thinking about that, I'd like to mention a few of the leaders specifically, some of the ones God's raising up in Cusco, and I'm going to mention the leaders, and they're going to be young men and women, but I want to mention right now, before I forget, that God is raising up men and women of all ages. We have men looking towards eldership, others towards deaconship. We have women who are looking towards being the wives of elders and deacons, but also thinking about teaching, ladies' classes, and children's ministries, but of all ages, not just of these young people. But I want to focus on these young people for just a moment. I want to introduce, first of all, a young man by the name of Percy. And this happened a couple of years ago, but I'm having trouble advancing the slides. So somebody can help me up there. Thank you. Percy arrived in Cusco from his hometown, Curawasi. Curawasi is interesting. Mainly Quechua speakers. A lot of people don't know Spanish in Curawasi, Peru. But it's a little town of maybe 10,000 people. And he grew up just speaking Quechua. And he was kind of a country boy, kind of displaced. And he moved to Cusco. And there in Cusco, he began to study for his career. And he grew up in the church, a Church of Christ in Curawasi, a small church of about 30 people. He grew up there, came to know the gospel, was baptized into Christ, and began to grow in that. But as he moved to Cusco, away from his parents and family when he was about 15, he lost himself, lost his training in Christ, and grew away from the church, from God. And then one day he walked into his one-bedroom apartment. It wasn't really even an apartment, just one-bedroom area that he was renting. And it was completely wiped out. Somebody had gone in there and stolen everything. And Percy did immediately what all of us would do. He immediately remembered the church. He remembered God. He remembered his life. He felt ashamed. And immediately he looked for the Church of Christ on the main avenue that he had seen before. That was our congregation. And I remember Percy, when he walked in the front doors of our church building on a certain Sunday, and he had this big smile, and you could tell he was eager, and he was friendly, and he was wanting to know more about us and about the church there. And from that day onward, Percy was there every single Sunday. And it wasn't long before he started assuming leadership opportunities. He started teaching. Then we had him preach some, and he was capable in preaching, and he had influence with others, and he started discipling others. And so Percy began to assume leadership, and we saw that in him, and we began to train him in leadership. I have a video of Percy speaking, if we could go ahead and cue that up. And you won't be able to hear the Spanish. You wouldn't understand. I'm assuming you wouldn't understand it. Maybe some of you would. But we have subtitles here so you can read along. I'd like to introduce you to another leader that God has raised up in Cusco in our church, Elvis. Elvis is pictured here. Elvis, the picture there with his smile kind of reflects his personality. That's how Elvis is. He's very warm and friendly, very inviting as far as making friends with others. And so Elvis has a lot of friends and very social, a very good guy. But Elvis grew up in another congregation. I've mentioned before there are now 4 congregations. When we arrived, there were only 2. And this other congregation has been there 40 years. It's about 80 or so in attendance. Elvis grew up in that church. But when he became a teenager, he began to fall away, and he got into the nightlife of Cusco and kind of got carried away with that and really withdrew into that and fell away from the Lord, and all his friends and all his social ties and everything he had was all away from the church. And again, he had no contact with the church. When we arrived, his brother-in-law, Socrates, approached us, who was a member of the church in Wanchok, the other congregation in town. He approached us and he said, "My brother-in-law, Elvis, fell away from the Lord. He no longer has anything to do with the church. He parties all night, he drinks all night, and his life is a wreck." And he said, "Could you guys, we've tried several times, could you guys make contact with Elvis?" And so we decided to do that. And you never know how things are going to go, but we began to pray for Elvis and pray for his soul and pray that he would come back to the Lord. And little by little, we made friendship with him, and he began to return to God, to the church. And after that, as he responded and repented, he began to, again, assume influence and leadership in the congregation. He began to teach and preach, and Elvis is an excellent preacher in Cusco. He's very gifted in speaking. And so he stands before the church and he preaches with a lot of confidence, and he's able to present the gospel message in a great way. I have a video of Elvis. Before that, I want to introduce his wife, Yolanda, as well. They were married about a year ago. Yolanda came to the church through Elvis when they were dating, and we studied the Bible with Yolanda, and she was baptized. And then after that, we began working with them as a couple, and they decided to marry. And they asked me to be their godfather. They have a tradition there where a godfather is someone, and a godmother is a couple who influences and gives them counsel and advice on their marriage. And so I'm a godfather, which is kind of cool, for Elvis and Yolanda. I have a video of the two of them speaking with you all as well. That's some of our men. And what's interesting about Elvis and Percy, and of course Yolanda has influence in the congregation, especially, of course, with the ladies there, is that it was difficult in the beginning to encourage them and to open up an avenue for them to understand what we meant by leadership and what the Bible teaches about leadership. And so there were several moments for several months or even a couple of years where we were shoulder tapping and pulling them aside and talking to them about leadership and explaining to them that they would be good leaders, good evangelists in the church. But it seemed to just kind of die after the conversation. And we understood then that we need to form something for them to understand maybe some kind of specific pathway, and that's what we called it among ourselves, is a leadership pathway. How can we provide something more specific for them? And so we would develop 3 levels that we asked them to pass through in order to then receive formal leadership. We said, first of all, we want you to be an active member. We want everyone else to look at you and say, if there is an active member in the congregation, it's Elvis and Percy. And they did that for 6 months, and we're there for everything, and we're always involved in looking for service opportunities. And after that, we said, good, we want you now to assume leadership and to have influence in the congregation. They did that. They were doing one-on-one studies. They were doing Bible studies, teaching courses. They were preaching, leading in worship. They were doing all kinds of ministry that fit their gifts and how God gifted them, and they were doing it in an excellent way. And then after that, we said, we want more time with you, and so we're going to invite you into an internship. And so they interned with us, with the missionaries, and they worked with us for 6 months. And they began to disciple 2 other guys. The 2, Percy and Elvis, each were discipling 2 other guys. And after that, they left and went to an institute in Central America to study theology for 4 years. And they're there now. They've been there for 6 months, and they're doing great. They tell me they're making good grades. I try to stay in touch with them once a week, and they're doing excellent. Yolanda's with Elvis there. She's studying with the ladies as well. And so they're going through formal leadership so that they can come back and to continue to work and replace ourselves in the work in Cusco. And those 4 men that they discipled, we're now working with 4 guys. And we're encouraging them to disciple other men. So you can see it's multiplication. It's not just addition, but it's multiplication that's happening in Cusco, where we're raising up more and more leaders as a result of God raising up the initial set of leaders that are Percy and Elvis and others. And so that's interesting. But I want to also talk about 2 Timothy 2 and verse 2. This is also biblical. Paul, writing to Timothy, gave us this equation, gave to us this idea of one generation discipling another, which disciples another. He wrote, "And what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men," and then he says, "who will be able to teach others as well." So you can see the generations, spiritual generations of others teaching others who are equipped to teach others. I want to also mention, we're working with the ladies in Cusco, and we decided a long time ago it would be horrible to just train up men and to neglect the leadership and the training of the women, the Peruvian ladies in Cusco. And so we want to talk for a minute about women leading women. Women leading women's ministries and also children's ministries in the area that God has given them to lead in the church. And so we have some missionary ladies who are very gifted in this. Here's Corinne and Sarah, and they're training, discipling 2 other ladies here. And I want to introduce a few of them to you. This is Sharit, and she's studying psychology, but she was baptized, studied the Bible with us, was baptized, and immediately took interest in teaching and helping out with the teaching ministries at the church. And here's a picture of her in a local coffee shop, and she had finished teaching a women's Bible study with some of our young ladies in the church there, and so she is very gifted in this area. Also, Carmen. Carmen is studying nursing, but she has expressed several times she wants to somehow find a way to practice nursing in relation with the church and help the church out in that ministry. But she's also gifted in teaching, especially in the children's ministry. We had a campaign last year. Some of the campaigners came down, and Carmen was in charge of some of the children's ministries during that campaign. Her cousin, Adriana, also came to the Lord about the same time. She studied with her mom. They were both baptized, and Adriana is gifted in service, always thinking about benevolence, and she often collects some of the young people, and they go out in the streets of Cusco with bread and water, and here they are serving in the streets, and she's always thinking about leading and helping out others. I have a video with the girls at this time speaking to you all. They said the last part in English. Maybe you can hear it just a little bit, but they practiced that and wanted to say it in English. When thinking about that, again, I want to stress that we have been working with not just the college age or the young people in this area. We've been working with several. Obviously, we spend a lot of time and invest a lot of time in the younger group because we know that they will continue to grow and have a lot of influence in the city. But we are equipping others. We're looking for elders. We're looking for deacons, elders' wives, deacons' wives. We're looking to establish leadership. We're taking the initiative. We're trying to be proactive about it because I think that's important. But you think about all these things and you think about this statement, culture of evangelism. How, and this is a question we ask a lot in the States right now, how can we have a culture of evangelism? How can we have this idea where all members are active in evangelism and not just a group of people? How can we accomplish this? And this is something that we've been doing as we've been networking among the members so that we can reach out to their friends and family in kind of a friendship evangelism approach, and also reaching out in campaigns to those that God's calling to the church through the gospel. And so how can we create this? We've been doing this for a few years and obviously doing the one-on-one studies. And we began to see as the church is growing, the missionaries, the 6 of us and now more of us, we cannot handle the workload. And so there was an obvious necessity to either reach our lid or our cap on growth, or we could disperse and delegate responsibilities and equip and train the Peruvians to do what we're currently doing. So this was something necessary for us to be able to continue to grow. And so we've done that. And now we're continuing to grow. For example, we had our 5th year anniversary in October, and we had so many in attendance that we had to plan and move the worship service, the anniversary service, in the nearby park. And we rented tents and everything. We had over 200 in attendance that day. And also, this is a picture of our current location. We are at max capacity right now. We now have moved to 2 services, which I realize that you all are about to do as well. But that's difficult at times, but it's also necessary when you think about growth. And we don't want the building, our location, to be an obstacle. Let me mention very quickly a snapshot of where we began and where we are currently. You probably can't read all the little letters on that, but I'll mention it very quickly. October 2009, the team arrived to the field. In 2010 of October, the team established and began working with the congregation. We had our inaugural service during that month. In mid-2013, we had 60 in average worship attendance. And in April 2014, the church moved to the current rented facility where it is in Magisterio, the neighborhood there. In March 2015, we said, the church is growing, the worship attendance, we're going to move to 2 services now so that we don't create an obstacle. And in December of 2015, we had 96 in average attendance. In January, we sent out Elvis and Yolanda and Percy to be trained. And in June 2016, just recently, we averaged 115 in average attendance. We've had 96 baptisms to date in Cusco in the last 5.5 years. Currently, our auditorium is maxed out, and we're looking to the next step. We're looking to see what God is going to do in the next chapter in the work in Cusco. Let me mention that very quickly. Some of you, all of you, just about have already seen these, but very quickly, our overarching goals. First of all, as a team, our goal is to target middle-class heads of households. And this isn't exclusive. This is to create an environment that's middle-class so that we can reach the upper and the lower class. We want a culture in our congregation that is open to all. Number 2, we believe that establishing a self-sustaining congregation of 300 to 500 members will provide a powerful force for even more church plants by the Peruvian members. And you say, well, that's a lot. But in 10 to 15 years, we hope to accomplish this. And we're about to accomplish year 6, finish year 6. We're already at 120. And so this is very realistic as we think about the growth in Cusco. Number 3, our goal is to replace ourselves, and the training of Peruvian leadership is interwoven into everything we do as missionaries. If we're doing something, there should be a Peruvian by our side. Either doing it themselves and we're just there to guide the conversation or the Bible study, or they're learning from us as we're doing it. And so everything is done with Peruvian leadership in mind. Number 4, a strategy that is specifically important in Latin America context is securing a permanent, centralized location for the church to meet. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. Number 5, we must guide the Peruvians in establishing one additional congregation before the missionary presence leaves Cusco. This is my personal favorite. I like this idea of a church being established, or the goal, I should say, of the church being established, and now this church is going to establish other congregations in the region of Cusco. It may be in the city of 500,000, or maybe in the province of 1.2 million. But we are going to establish more congregations in the area because we've already done it once, and the missionaries aren't going to do it, but rather the Peruvians are going to do it as the missionaries stand back and watch and guide. These are our 5 goals. I mentioned these probably at Roebuck maybe 7 years ago. We have continued with the same 5 goals. And the idea is that we go back to them and study them and realize that they're our guiding goals. And we don't change the goals. We change how we accomplish the goals, but not the goals. I want to talk about goal number 4. We're about at this moment to start talking about a building program, a permanent location. And I want to talk about the need. Why? I mentioned we're already at 2 worship services. We're already maxed out our location, and there's not a lot of possibilities as far as moving to a larger rented facility. And so very quickly, I want to talk about what's been done in Cusco, or in Latin America, not just in Cusco in the past. Because of time, I'm going to skip some quotations. They all kind of say the same idea, make the same conclusion. There's a resource called the Main Avenue Handbook. And it says in the book, the lack of a permanent building has often hindered church establishment in South America by churches of Christ. A cursory reading of missionary newsletters from the past 4 decades paints a common portrait of churches that have failed to grow beyond 40 or 50 members. Multiple moves provoked by inflation, terminated rental contracts, inadequate space, high rent, and limited building access hindered the stability that is necessary for congregational growth and development. And I have traveled through several parts of Latin America. In fact, about 2.5 months ago, we were in Lima for the birth of our newborn, our youngest, Alba. And we were there for a few weeks, and I was able to worship with a few churches of Christ in Lima, the capital city. And I went to one Sunday, and it was 25 members in a poorly located facility, very small facility, permanent location for them. They owned the property. The next Sunday, I went to a completely different makeup, a different kind of congregation. It was the Church of Christ, but I want to say a different makeup as far as the attenders go. Very different group of people. In a different location, obviously. It was a rented facility, 25 people in attendance. All that to say, the average worship attendance in Peru, not just Latin America, but in Peru, is about 30 individuals. Doesn't matter if they've been around for decades, about 30 individuals. We're at 120, and we need to do something. And there's several other resources that say this as well. 3 key aspects, and I'll close with this. The location is important. Can't just be in any location or any place in a back alley. The cheapest route is not always the best. It must be highly visible. There's not a lot of social media going on in Peru. Not a lot of invitations through the website. And so it must be highly visible. And the size is key. Obviously, we're looking for something that's large enough for 300 to 500 people. And we understand that that number is necessary to accomplish self-sustaining congregation. So the size is key as well. I want to make you aware of this. We're not asking for something specifically right now, and obviously we need to meet with each congregation about this, but I want to challenge the church here to begin thinking about, as you're thinking about your own building program, to begin thinking about our circumstance in Cusco. In a few months, I have teammates, Ryan and Sarah Davis. They'll be coming to the States for 4 months, and they're there to provide more information to those who are interested. Some of our congregations who have been partnering with us, they'll be available. If there's an opportunity here, if there's interest here, we would love to be able to provide more information about that. And so we'll be in touch with the congregation. And the idea, again, is to take away all the obstacles that we can so that this church can reach a level of being self-sustaining, of being a large church plant, and accomplishing those 5 overarching goals. So that in 10, 20, 30 years, we can look back and we can see a large group of Peruvian Christians that are self-sustaining, but it's also a perpetual work that's planning and establishing other congregations of Lord's Church in the region of Cusco. Thank you again. It's great to be with the church again. I believe I'm out of time. Is that correct? Okay. Ish. If I have more time, I can take questions, but I didn't know whether to expect a bell or what. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. If you could go get